Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Welcome to a special bonus episode of the Brian Keane podcast where we are going to do a recap, an unedited episode on the HYROX in Turin, Italy from February 2nd. I did quite a popular episode, a recap from the Dublin HYROX on the 18th of November 2024. I will try and link that episode in the description below, or you can scroll through wherever you listen to podcasts and get the Dublin recap. And I mentioned in that show that HYROX was something that, although very confusing from the Dublin event, which I'll talk about in terms of comparison in today's show, it was something that I was going to do again. And lo and behold, I did. I did a HYROX and completed it a couple of days ago. I'm still a little bit jet lagged coming back from Italy, just with the stopover in Frankfurt. It was several hours, so about 12 or 13 hours of traveling yesterday. So bear with me if my brain is a little bit slower than normal. But I'm going to use today's show to talk about how I prepared for the HYROX, how the actual event went, and what's next. Because in the Dublin episode, I had just came off the back of summiting Kilimanjaro with 10 of my followers from social media with Earth's Edge, and that was the high priority goal of the end of October. I came home and 2 weeks later there was the Dublin HYROX, which I had signed up for in the summer, that I planned on doing to see if it was something that I liked. So the training for that was all hiking based, very much down to the summit for Kilimanjaro and keeping that focus in mind. So there was pros and cons to my lead up to that event that I've hopefully rectified in the training for the Turin event that happened on Saturday. And I will go through exactly what I did in terms of my training split and my nutrition for anyone that is listening that wants to consider a HYROX and a solo or a team up based HYROX where you split the circuits and you do the runs together. But something I didn't cover in that episode, for some of you who are not familiar with HYROX, is actually what the competition is. So I actually used ChatGPT to help me kind of give this brief synopsis. So I'll run through some of the things it says just so I can paint the bigger picture if you're unfamiliar with it. So HYROX is a competition that merges running and functional fitness into one event. So the idea is that it's created for every fitness enthusiast, from seasoned athletes to weekend warriors and everyone in between. So what I did notice in the Dublin HYROX and the same in Turin is you have all shapes and sizes doing the event. You have people who look like they would run a 100-mile ultramarathon, others who look like they'd win a CrossFit competition, and then all the way down to people who this is possibly their first ever race they've signed up for. They're working on a weight goal. They're would be considered carrying more weight than the average athlete, and they're still making their way around the track just in a slower time. And HYROX, and the goal is that it's kind of reshaping the way that people view endurance and strength and kind of merging that hybrid athlete culture that we're going into now. So it's a running 8 kilometers with 8 functional movements in between. I'll run through the functional movements. So it's a 1 kilometer run. So each segment will have a 1 kilometer run that you do, and then you go on to a station. So you start with a 1 kilometer run, then you go on to a ski erg, which is a machine a lot of gyms will have, basically mimicking a ski, that you'll do for 1,000 meters. You'll then do a kilometer run again. You'll have a sled push, and you can push a heavier sled over a specified distance depending on what level you sign up for. So it's different for men, different for women, different for the open versus the pros. Then you do a 1 kilometer run again. It's for 50 meters for the sled push, apologies. Then you have a sled pull, which again is 50 meters. So it's 4 up and down. You go up, down with the sled pull with a rope. You do your 1 kilometer run. Then you've got your burpee broad jumps. And again, I can't remember the distance that this goes for. I would say somewhere between 50 and 100 meters as well. It's pretty long, the burpee broad jumps. Then you go with your 1 kilometer run. Then you've got your 1,000 meter row on a rowing machine. Then you do your 1 kilometer run. Then you've got your kettlebell farmers carries for, again, I can't remember the exact distance, but it's over a specified distance with a specified weight. Again, lighter for women, heavier for men, lighter for the open, heavier for the pros. And then a 1 kilometer run with sandbag lunges is your next circuit, over the similar distance to the farmer's carry, I think, or the similar distance to the burpee broad jumps, 1 kilometer run, and then 100 wall balls to finish. And that's your whole race. When I signed up for Dublin in November, it was and took a very heavy back seat. My time for that was 1:32 with all the penalties. So I went wrong several times in Dublin, and I was actually quite annoyed, partly with myself, partly with the event for how it was laid out, because it was very difficult to find your way around, partly because it was in the RDS in Dublin, and it's with looking at the map, you can't at first glance figure out where you need to go, whereas in Turin, it was so obvious where you were running because all the stations were side by side. So you had station 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and then 8 was in the middle. And you would do a kilometer run. It was basically 3 laps. You did 2.2 on the first one, and then it was the same for the last 7. So straight away, it was very easy to wrap your head around. Now, I'm sure Dublin would have been fine as well if I had asked somebody how the layout goes. I know the guy in front of me who I talked about following after the rower because he was in my wave. I followed him because he had written it on his hand because the distances that you were covering was different each time, and I just couldn't make heads or tails of it in Dublin. Part of it down to my first time at the event. I also didn't realize there was a screen that would tell you what you had to do as you maneuvered and ran through. And in Turin, that wasn't an issue. I knew straight away there was going to be a screen. I knew that I had to check the map beforehand, and I was able to hit a 1:19:11 time in the Turin HYROX, which was actually slower than I hoped. I was hoping to crack between 1:10 and 1:15, and again, I would need to get faster on my runs. I'll talk about what I did in my training in a moment, but it still ended up being the first in the wave because of the times. The times were slower. Like, this sounds a lot more impressive when you say that you were first in your wave, but there was 10 seconds between me and second. I did 1:19:11. The next was Paolo something. He did 1:19:21, and then there was 3 or 4 minutes between us and the next people. So again, it sounds a lot more impressive when I say you came first in your wave, but in reality it was actually quite a slow wave. So again, just to bring my own ego back into a check here, but I actually had hoped that I would crack 1:15 on it. But with the layout, I couldn't flaw it. I thought I couldn't put any flaw into it. I thought it was one of the best organized events that I've been to, from the registration to the warm-up area to the clarity of when you were starting to the race layout to afterwards the communication between how well you had done. And again, not to knock the Dublin event, that one seems to be getting better year on year, and you're going to be limited by the RDS and the physical event location, and you probably need a bigger area. The one in Turin was probably treble the size of the RDS in terms of actual physical space. So they were able to lay everything out perfectly, and it was very, very clear. So highly recommend it in terms of the race and the run. How I trained for it this time. I had some ups and downs when it came to my training, and the upside of something like HYROX is you get to mix up a lot of different movements in your training when you're preparing for an event like this. But the downside is it's still a lot of mileage on your legs. So something I've been struggling with for about 3 weeks is some knee tendinopathy because of doing my runs on the treadmill. When you're preparing in December, January, especially in Ireland, it's too dangerous to run outside. A lot of it was ice for January. Most of December was like that, or worst case scenario, it's just going to be wet and slippy. So you're doing a lot of it on the treadmill, which means that when you're doing speed work, and I was doing a lot of 400-meter repeats, so to build up the speed, my theory going into this was similar to what I do with ultramarathons. I don't run 100-mile weeks when I'm training for an ultramarathon because my knees, my ankles, my hips can't take that. I can't do those junk miles at age 37 like I could have at age 27 without bearing the brunt and the negative effects. Whereas I do a lot of high quality training, so fast 10Ks, and trying to improve that time so that you're building up your aerobic capacity in nearly a borderline anaerobic way, not quite, but you're building it up, your fitness in a quality way with less time so that you're able to hit the mileage when you decrease the speed for something like a 50-mile ultramarathon or beyond. That's what I've done historically with ultramarathons. I did something similar here with the HYROX, but it actually backfired on me. I was doing those 400-meter repeats at the end of workouts, so 400 meters followed by a 90-second to 2-minute rest, and going very fast for 400 meters and doing that 4 to 5 times. And because of the impact on the treadmill, it started to grate on my knee a small bit. So I've been playing around and working with physios and rehabilitation and different devices with massage guns, rollers, dry needling, etc., to try and reduce some of that knee tendinopathy. I wouldn't do that again. And again, you might have a completely different body set to me. If you're younger, you don't have a history of knee issues. I've had several dislocations. I've torn meniscuses. So I have underlying issues with my knee. I'm also age 37, so I have to be mindful of this. I don't think my weight helps either. I'm 83, 84 kilos, quite a lot of muscle, quite well built. So it's a lot of poundage on a treadmill. So your mileage may vary, pardon the pun, based on your starting point, based on your weight, based on your injury history. But for me, it didn't work that well. But what it did do was it made the 1 kilometer runs feel really easy. And I was able to go what I thought quite quickly until the rower. when I hit the rower, which is station 6, my run slowed down because my knee started to pull on the rower. I think it was after the burpee broad jumps, one of my best events in terms of the speed. I have a very good burpee broad jump time, same in Dublin, same in Turin. But when I hit the rower, then my knee started to pull. I started to feel it grating on me. And for the next 3 kilometers after that, then I definitely slowed down because it was sore. It was painful. And I had a strategy for the runs. I was going relatively slow as a recovery lap the first time round, and then I was going fast on the second lap coming into the next event. The theory and thinking for me being, if I go fast on the second lap running, I'm going to get a break in terms of muscle groups based on the whatever the station is, if it's a ski erg, a sled, broad jumps, rower, farmers carries, with the exception of sandbag lunges, which is very leg dominant, you're kind of getting a little bit of a leg break from your run, definitely in the movement pattern. So in my training, I did a lot of those 400 meter repeats at the end of every session. I also did a couple of kilometer runs with circuits in between, but I would do more of that this time, I think, and try and make the kilometer runs faster, meaning that you're picking 5-6 exercises, ideally ones that are going to tie in directly into HYROX, and then put them in with your kilometer run. So what I did in the early phases in December was I was doing a lot of sled pushes with 1 kilometer runs at the end, partly because when I did the HYROX in Dublin, my legs felt like jelly after the first sled push, and that's the second station. But because the weight is quite heavy, I found that my hamstrings and glutes were just all tightened up when I was trying to do that kilometer run. So what I did to offset it this time was I was doing sled pushes, heavy sled pushes, even heavier than what would be the required weight in the HYROX itself, and then doing a 1 kilometer run after, and then I would go back and do the sled, 1 kilometer run, back and do the sled, 1 kilometer run. I was normally doing 4 stations up and down on a 25 meter track, so about 100 meters on the sled push based on the gym that I was training in. And I would intersperse this with different training stations on alternative days. So on a Monday, I could do a sled push with a run. On a Tuesday, I could do a burpee broad jump with the runs in between. On a Thursday, I could do with the rower and alternating that with the runs. And that's what was helping me get better at the stations. There's some, and you're going to be exactly the same as me, that you're going to find relatively easy. I find the ski erg very easy. I've got quite strong triceps. My core is strong. I have a good time on that. I find the sled pushes easy once I've trained for them. Sled pulls are a little bit slow because there's a technique required to do it correctly, and I couldn't mimic that in the gym. Burpee broad jumps are a very strong move for me. I'm built like a 5'8" little hobbit, so I've got short legs. I'm able to get down and get up quickly. So I have a very fast burpee broad jump. I have a slow row. I have poor rowing technique, which I know myself. I have very tight hamstrings, which tend to get exacerbated when I'm rowing for distance. Kettlebell farmers carries, I'm quite strong with. Again, literally grew up on a farm, so that's a movement that's strong for me. The only downside with Turin, and I can't remember if Dublin had this, was the grip. I feel like there was chalk in different sections of the Dublin one. I might be making that up or misremembering, but I kept gripping and losing weight of the 24 kilo kettlebells, so I had to drop them a couple of times because they were slipping out of my hand. The sandbag lunges, a weaker movement for me based on my history of knee issues, and wall balls are a movement pattern that I'm not particularly good at. I'd say they're probably the weakest because I sweat quite a lot when I'm running, and when you're sweating with a wall ball, you can lose grip of the ball. So it has smashed me in the face several times throwing a 6 kilo ball against a space. I try to break it up into, the plan was to do reps of 25 and do it 4 times for 100 reps, but I actually had to chunk it down further. I did 25 the first round, 20 the second round, and then I had to break it into 10s after that because I kept either slipping or my legs and my knee was really pulling when I was dropping into a squat. My weakness on HYROX is win, and probably always will be the run. I'm not a particularly strong runner. I'm not a slow runner, but I'm built for very short distances, 20 meters, 50 meters, 100 meters max. So once we go up into 1,000 meters or a kilometer run, I am considerably slower than the average athlete based on a whole host of factors, not being a genetically strong runner, not having great biomechanics for distance runs, etc. So that's something I need to work on too. But you will see, you might be the complete reverse of that. I've got friends of mine who used to train in Wildway, in the CrossFit gym I was in, who are very strong runners and find the stations more difficult because they're very fast 1 kilometer runners. And that's the kind of beauty of HYROX. Depending on your specialty and your background, you're going to find that you gravitate more towards either the stations or the run. i.e. hybrid athlete, average lifter, shit runner. That's me. And again, pure identification in terms of a hybrid athlete there. So that's, again, as I mentioned, it makes it very accessible for a lot of people. You can be in your first year of training, or you can have trained like me for 20 plus years and still do a HYROX. You'll just be doing it for a different time. You had people that were averaging probably around 1 hour 40 was the kind of average for the Italy time from what I could see on the results. 1 hour 32 was the general average time for HYROX events for the average person. So it was a little bit slower than, say, Dublin or the UK or potentially Scotland or Manchester, where you'd have different high-level athletes who train specifically for HYROX. Again, some people hitting the records for the speed, and I think it's 56 minutes for the male open, which is a crazy fast time when you think about an event that's this short, that it's taking 1 hour 15, 1 hour 30 to be able to knock 20, 30 minutes off an average time is fast and strong. So great athletes, these people that are doing it. But what I'd say when it comes to the training is work on your weaknesses, which is a very obvious thing for a coach and a personal trainer to say, but it really does come true in HYROX, because your runs are the most important thing. But if you do get caught on a station, you're going to lose a lot of time. So I seen people on the sleds who were in my wave that were just bet after the second round, and they were just taking 2-3 minutes to recover, and I had it finished in that time. You had 2-3 minutes and it was done, where they were just gassed from the heavy weight on the sleds. Whereas if they looked at their training and focused a lot more sleds, pushes and pulls into their workout routine, they would have found that their recovery was fast after. Something else that I learned from triathlon training, I was training for an Ironman in 2020, which I didn't do because I got cancelled with COVID, but I was training for that Ironman in Cork, and I was doing a lot of brick sessions, which is where you do running and biking together. So you do a long bike ride and then you do a run after. The reason being that your legs feel really jellyish after coming off a bike and then you go into a run. But that brick style training works very well for HYROX, because when you do a station, you find that your legs or your body is really fatigued in a different way, and then you have to run after. And that can be quite difficult if you're not used to training that way, or you haven't built it into your workout routine. A mistake I see quite commonly with HYROX athletes is they split their workouts and they do their circuits in one session in the gym, and then they do their runs separately. And by all means, there's a time and a place for that, where you go into the gym and you do all these movement patterns. You do some sets of sled pushes, sled pulls, burpee broad jumps, rower, farmer's carry, sandbag lunges, wall balls, and then a separate time or another day you're doing a 3, 5, 8 kilometer run. But I would definitely consider blending them in some of your workouts, so that you're getting your body used to switching from different energy systems, because you're going from like a heavy aerobic 1 kilometer run to something that's quite anaerobic when it comes to something like a sled push, or even a sandbag lunge or a farmer's carry. They're still aerobic. You're getting your heart rate really high up, but there's a lot of resistance on your body. And if you're not used to running after that, it can be and feel quite debilitating. And you'll see people crunched over or hunched over trying to catch their breath after stations, because they're trying to build themselves up to another 1 kilometer run around the track. So in your training, definitely build out a program that has the combination and has some workouts with treadmill work in between, or if you're training yourself outside, do something that's got circuits in between, so that you're getting your body used to switching between those energy systems. That's, again, one of the best things about CrossFit. It's, again, the high-end jack of all trades, master of none. Unless you're a very high-level athlete for CrossFit, you end up getting quite good at everything, but not amazing at anything, and that's okay. That's the beauty of CrossFit. It's why people like it, gravitates towards it. I'm a big fan. I've trained ADHD. I like that it mixes it up regularly, but it regularly makes you switch between energy systems. You'll do burpees for 21 reps, and you'll do a max bench press. So you're switching from creatine phosphate into a anaerobic or into an aerobic zone if you've got a run at the end of it or a bike at the end of it. And that's where you will see people who have that base do better in these events, because they're less fatigued. When I get to the finish line and got to the finish line in Turin, and I was pushing it pretty hard, I was perfect 30 seconds, a minute after, because my body had recovered. I trained this way, where a lot of the guys because it was the opens men's wave, a lot of the guys were lying down for 5-10 minutes after and couldn't actually get up. And that's down to not having prepared your body to jump into those different energy systems. And it's such a shock to the system. And you can offset a lot of that with your training by designing the plan correctly. So make sure you add in what would be like a hybrid version of brick sessions with these movement patterns from HYROX with your runs, whether it's speed work, fast 100 miles, fast 100-meter runs, 400-meter runs like I was doing, or even all the way up to a 1-kilometer run. That's the training side. I don't have too much else to speak about when it comes to the nutrition. I prepared like exactly as I would for a normal workout for this. I did was doing the 1 o'clock wave, the 1 p.m. wave. So I woke up at about 8:30. I had 100 grams of oats and a scoop of protein, and I had an apple about 2 hours before, and then 30 minutes before the race, I had what would be my normal pre-workout, which was at minus the creatine. I used citrulline malate for blood flow. I used the beta-alanine, 3 grams for lactic acid. I had AAKG for a little bit of, wasn't really muscle pump, but again, blood flow, and acetyl L-carnitine just to help with a little bit of focus with the 200 mcg caffeine tablet. And that got me to the race. That's normally what I would use for my pre-workout shake, with the exception of I normally add 3 to 5 grams of creatine in there, and I kept that same routine. I'm better to have a bit of an empty stomach going into these races. But again, having the food, having the fuel beforehand will certainly help you. If you're traveling, it is more difficult. We did about 25,000 steps around Turin the day before, which definitely isn't great race prep. But again, HYROX isn't my jam. I was doing it because it's fitness tourism, get to see a city, get to document it, get to do something fun, cover my workout for the day, all the good stuff that comes with it. But I had done a lot of steps the day before, so my legs were a little bit heavy. And I just carb loaded the night before with 300 grams of baby new potatoes in my last meal. So nothing too hectic. This is way easier if you're training for a home event, or you're not traveling, or you're traveling with a PB in mind and your entire focus is towards your goal of hitting a specific time. For me, it was secondary. I wanted to hit somewhere between 110 and 115. I went over on that, even though I did what would be considered to me as close to a perfect race as possible, minus the knee pull after the roars. So I couldn't really see in this specific event where I was going to pick up more time, apart from my run slowed down for the last 3 kilometers because of a knee pull. But again, that's going to happen to everybody. If you have a niggle going in, an ankle, hips, knee, lower back, it can pull on an event like this. And that's just the nature of the beast, is the nature of training for something like this. So I would say, as a recommendation, what I thought about HYROX in Turin, I thought it was a tremendously well-organized event. Hopefully the one in Dublin, if it goes ahead in November 2025, will be similar. That they were night and day in terms of the amount of emails and prep I got. With Dublin, I actually didn't get any emails about my race number, about my race time. Maybe I put in the wrong email when I signed up, because others apparently did get this. In Turin, I got an abundance of messages that had the race map, the times, the layout, when I'd be on. And then the same when I got over there. The registration was very smooth. The race itself was very well run. The post-event was very well organized. I couldn't speak highly enough about it. And again, I'm sure the Irish events and the other ones will be taking a lot of these lessons in improving it every year. So if you do go back and listen to the episode from 18th of November 2024, I had a lot of confusion. I had so many penalties from going wrong. It was the most confused I've ever been at a race. Whereas in Turin, I've got to give them credit. Even though I did research beforehand, like I didn't last time, you couldn't go wrong in this because of the way the stations were laid out and the way it was set up. There was no way to go wrong with it. So that's a testament to the organizers in Italy in the Turin event. So I highly recommend it. If you are training for a HYROX and you're designing your own program, consider what I said about the brick sessions with your nutrition. Again, that's always going to be the same, and you feel free to copy what I do or copy what I did with the pre-workout nutrition. But general rule of thumb before race day is just do what you've been doing before your sessions. Generally, when I'm working with people in programs who are prepping for a race, and what I advise anybody that listens to the podcast is, you're going to have one day a week that is very specific for your event: half marathon, marathon, ultra marathon, HYROX, triathlon, etc. And when you are doing that one session, that's your focus point or focal point for the week. That's where you test things. Test your nutrition the day before, test your nutrition the day of, test your supplementation supplementation. Do not do that on race day. Literally one of the worst mistakes you'll see people make is they'll try a new gel or they'll try a new food because they've panicked about their carb load or panicked about their fuel source, and then they'll get gut distress or some other ailment that will put a hindrance or knock their body for the race, and then they end up not having or doing the performance or getting the performance they want because they veered off plan. So use your training window, use your training time to experiment with things so that you know exactly what you're doing on race day. If you've trained well enough, I love the old Spartan line that bleed less in training, or sweat more in training, bleed less in war. And I think that's very applicable here for events like this, where if you train really hard, the event itself doesn't feel that difficult. It's either equal or even slightly less than your hardest training session in the lead up. If you can do that, you're going to find you're going to have quite a success in this style of training for fitness racing for HYROX or any other event you do. That's everything from today's podcast. Bonus episode for the Brian Keane Fitness. I've called it the Brian Keane podcast. I forgot I rebranded that like 5 years ago. And hopefully you enjoyed it. Let me know. Hit me up on Instagram. Send me a DM, Brian_Keane_fitness. I'll put the link to the Dublin episode below as well if you want to check out that recap. And if you decide to go HYROX, I have no affiliation, no ambassadorship. I have no link to them. But again, it's a really fun, inclusive race. It's very fatty and fitness trendy at the minute, but I can see why. It's accessible to most people. There's different adaptive versions. I saw a blind competitor in Dublin, which is one of the greatest things I've seen at an event. I absolutely loved that. So there is an inclusive element here that's being pushed, and I think it's the reason it's taking off so much, that if you've been like me training for 20 years with a history of GA and bodybuilding and ultramarathons, you can do this and it gives a focus point to your training. Or if you're in your first year where you just need a goal that's performance based, something that's a little bit less boring than a long run, or just to give your mind an attention point so that you're not looking at the scale, obsessing over the mirror reflection, and you're switching that goal focus to performance. Something like HYROX could work really well. Consider maybe doing it with a friend. Do the doubles where you'll split the circuit. So you still do the 8-kilometer runs, but with the doubles, either mixed male and female, or same gender, men's or women's, in terms of how they do it. You split 50% of the circuit. So you'll do 500 meter ski erg, and the other person or your partner will do 500 meter ski erg. You'll do 25 meters on the sled, and your partner does 25 meters on the sled. So it splits it up. So it just means you're a little bit fresher for the runs. So yeah, consider that. Hopefully you enjoyed today's podcast. Let me know if you did. That's everything from me from today's show. Thanks for listening. Catch you all soon.